It seems like every time I read the news, there's a new article about the failure of our recycling system. As someone who makes videos about sustainability for a living and followed my recycling to a sorting facility, even I'm starting to have doubts about recycling. Is this really true? Is recycling beyond hope? And what about those plastic numbers? Why can I never get them straight? On this week's episode, I want to know, is recycling still worth it? To find out, I'll connect with experts with different perspectives on our recycling system.
The reality is that the United States does not have the proper waste infrastructure to actually address all of that recycling waste. And so they end up exporting it to countries in the global south.
To be clear, for good quality recyclables, there is demand. We've had a good, strong domestic market. Paper mills and things like aluminum and glass were always domestic.
We need to think beyond plastic recycling because plastic recycling is greenwashing.
And I'll finally get down to the truth on those pesky plastic recycling numbers.
If you see the numbers 3 through 7 on the bottom of your container, that is mostly what was going to China.
I'm Lucy Biggers, and this is One Small Step. So here's a little history on the US recycling system. You know that blue bin that gets collected by a truck at the end of your driveway? That's curbside recycling, and it's been around in the US for about 30 years. Today, about 60% of American households have curbside recycling. When it started, the main materials getting recycled were paper, metal, and glass. As the decades have gone by, the material makeup of our waste has shifted. One of the biggest changes has been that our plastic use has doubled, from 17 million tons in 1990 to about 35 million tons today. The rise in different kinds of plastics, which today are labeled numbers 1 through 7, created a more complicated waste stream that posed challenges to our recycling system. All right, hold up. Before we go any further, I need to figure out the deal with these plastic recycling numbers. So what I'm gonna do is sort all the plastic I can find in my apartment and figure out what is numbered what. Let's do it. So I've collected all the plastic containers in my apartment, or most of them, and I've sorted them, labels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So these are all different types of plastic with different recycling rules and accepted in some places, not accepted in others. Great, not confusing at all. More on these recycling numbers later in the video. Instead of regulating companies to use more sustainable materials, our federal government failed to act, leaving cities to start selling their low-grade plastic and paper waste to China. This seemed to work for decades, but in 2017, China had had enough of being a US dumping ground and passed the National Sword, a policy that banned contaminated plastics and other low-grade recycling materials. This law sent shockwaves through our recycling system and spurred some of the first articles claiming our recycling system was broken. In the first few months of 2018, our waste exports to China dropped by 35%, but the exporting didn't stop.
Because they can't ship it to China anymore, they're shipping it to Southeast Asia.
Kristy Drutman is a climate justice advocate and host of the podcast Brown Girl Green.
They end up doing what's called a waste transfer to countries in the global south, countries like the Philippines, where my family's from.
In 2018, the US was still shipping hundreds of thousands of shipping containers to other countries. And it's not that these countries had better recycling infrastructure than us. In fact, it's often worse. But this system allowed cities to wipe their hands of their waste and count these materials as recycled.
What happens is these countries then might not also have the proper waste infrastructure to address recycling waste, and then they'll end up burning these plastic items or having to figure out other ways to rummage through it and get rid of it. So it ends up, releasing a lot of toxic gases. A lot of these communities are exposed to the chemicals from these toxic fumes, and they end up just having to deal with this really monumental problem of other countries' waste because the countries where this waste originated are not actually properly dealing with the waste themselves.
In 2020, the US exported 1.37 billion pounds of plastic waste to other countries, down from 4.7 billion pounds in 2016. But countries like Malaysia saw plastic scrap imports increase by hundreds of millions of pounds. There is some good news. In 2019, over 180 countries joined together under the Basel Convention to create a global ban on the import of low-grade plastics. But the United States has yet to ratify the ban.
As someone who has tried my best to recycle over my adult life, it's so frustrating to hear that because our best intentions when we're making a choice about putting something into the blue bin is then leading to these downstream impacts that I don't think any of us would support. Should I feel bad that I've been recycling and like knowing that my waste might have been playing into this unequal system?
I don't think you should feel bad that you're recycling, because at the end of the day, if the US actually had proper waste management and the actual infrastructure to address recycling in the way that's necessary, then you'd already be ahead of the game in terms of having a very helpful habit. And at the end of the day, like, we have to address plastic at the source, how it's produced. And so you as a consumer recycling your bottle, you just need to know that like you're not doing anything bad by doing that, but that you're a part of this really big global system that's really complicated right now that the US has chosen to participate in to not properly address their waste.
So, what will it take for our recycling infrastructure to get to a place where we can handle our waste without exporting? I've reached out to Cole Rosengren, senior editor of the waste and recycling website WasteDive, to find out.
It seems like we have a huge supply of kind of contaminated recyclables that and there's no demand, so there's nowhere for them to go.
True, especially, for stuff that is contaminated, it's no one really wants it, and there's a lot of technology that's happening to try to sort that out and to get cleaner streams. A lot of what is considered mixed plastics, which to us, if you see the numbers 3 through 7 on the bottom of your container, that is mostly what was going to China. Numbers 1 and 2, which are a bigger part of the waste stream in terms of volume and more common, that is largely handled domestically. That was not affected as much.
Hold up, so Cole said that 3 through 7s have been getting shipped to China. So that means everything from here over, these containers would be the types of plastics that were getting shipped overseas and now don't really have a local market. It's frustrating as a consumer to know that these materials would not be accepted by most curbside recycling in the US. I will say though that most of the plastic I did find was 1s and 2s, which is a little bit encouraging. A lot of cleaning containers, foodware. I think 2s was the most popular item that I did find. So to know that these are getting recycled domestically does make me feel a little better, but the fact that here and over was getting shipped to China and now doesn't really have a local market or doesn't have a domestic market now frustrates me.
And to be clear, for good quality recyclables, there is demand throughout and still is. We've had a good, strong domestic market of paper mills and plastics facilities and things like aluminum and glass were always domestic. A lot of this stuff is staying local and things are moving, but certain streams, it's hard to make it worthwhile to clean it up. Even when there's education, folks are still putting things that maybe don't go in the bin for whatever reasons, or they're confused, and the technology just can't always handle it.
So individual error is an issue, but educating the public is so hard. That's because our recycling programs are run locally, which means the rules change from one town to the next. For example, where I live in New York, they built a high-tech recycling facility in 2013. Better technology allows New York residents to recycle a wider selection of materials.
Check for your local guidelines where possible, just to make sure that, and the list can change sometimes too. You may be surprised all of a sudden X thing is not considered acceptable anymore, and for various reasons. And it's hard to keep up. Usually can be expected to be recycled. Plastic bottles, aluminum cans, glass bottles, in most places, not all places, cardboard and most paper, you should be reasonably expected to get recycled if you put it in the bin.
So recycling paper, aluminum, cardboard, glass, and plastics 1 and 2 are still a good call in the US. But it's so frustrating that these plastics 3 through 7 aren't getting recycled. That's why many people are saying we need to rethink plastic altogether. Judith Enck is the president of Beyond Plastics. Before she started the nonprofit to tackle plastic pollution, she was an EPA regional administrator during the Obama administration.
The plastic pollution issue merges so many of the issues I've worked on my whole career: environmental justice, water quality, climate change, protecting fish and wildlife, and equity.
Beyond Plastics supports the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act that was recently introduced in Congress. The bill aims to stem the flow of plastic production by regulating the plastics industry and banning certain single-use plastics. If passed, it could fix a lot of the issues facing our recycling system. For one, the bill prevents plastic waste from being exported to other countries. It also includes national standardization of recycling labels and the expansion of 10-cent bottle deposits that already exist in 9 states. I did a video on the benefit of bottle deposit laws that you can watch here.
When we look at recycling, what is it with plastic versus some of these other materials that you say are okay to recycle?
Well, the other materials achieve a high recycling rate and they lend themselves to recycling. So an old newspaper can be recycled into a new newspaper. Same thing with an aluminum can. With plastics, there are so many different types of plastics and they have toxic additives. So you also worry about repeating the circle of poison if you're recycling material that has toxic chemicals in them. And they rarely, sometimes they do, but they rarely get recycled into the same item, like bottles to bottles. They're usually recycled bottles into carpet, or it's downcycled. The plastics industry knows this, but they keep putting out more complicated plastics. Plastic recycling is a dead end. And we should just be honest and recognize that we have to stop buying so much plastic.
The bill already has 100 co-sponsors, and Judith says that grassroots support will be key to seeing it passed.
So the way this bill will become law is with massive grassroots education, mobilization, and support. And what's great is anyone can pick up the phone and call their member of the House of Representatives or call one of their 2 U.S. senators. And I'm hopeful because the problem of plastic pollution just keeps getting worse, and we need to change the course that we are on. The petrochemical industry has grand plans to produce a lot more plastic. And scientists tell us that unless we get new laws on the books or new policies to reduce plastic, by 2050, for every pound of fish in the ocean, they are projecting there'll be 1 pound of plastic. And that is just unconscionable. And the only way you change that status quo is by passing strong laws like the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act.
So federal action could transform our recycling system. But if consumers don't have access, it won't even matter. Considering all the articles that are written about our recycling apocalypse, my assumption was that recycling sites are dropping like flies. In doing research for this video, I learned that about 100 recycling programs have shut down, 14 of those directly related to the pandemic. I decided to look up the populations of those 100 cities and towns, and by my estimate, about 2.9 million people, or 1.2 million households, have lost curbside recycling since 2018. That sounds like a lot, but 1.2 million households is less than 2% of the 69 million households that have curbside recycling. So yes, recycling programs have shut down, but more than half of American households are still served by a recycling program. So, is recycling still worth it? Well, yes, but honestly, the recycling system is broken. I believe that we need federal standardization of rules and increased regulation of our waste exports. Also, investment in domestic recycling is vital, and research has shown doubling our recycling capacity could create 370,000 jobs. So here's what you can do. Keep recycling, but check your local rules and stick to the materials that actually get recycled: aluminum, glass, plastics 1 and 2, paper, and cardboard. Next time you're buying something at the store, you can even look to make sure that the plastic you're getting is a 1 or 2. It's not perfect, but it's a start. If you want to support the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, visit beyondplastics.org. Recycling will not be fixed until we get better laws on the books. That is all for this episode. Let me know in the comments, how would you like to see our recycling system change?